Now it's recording.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Dave Graver, President of the American Nudist Research Library at Cypress Cove Resort. We are located in the American Nudist Research Library building, and we have as our film people Bob Proctor and Terry Crump. As our guest today, Fred Van Ness, who's been on the ANRL board for a long time, and we're going to talk some about his life at the library. How many nudist organizations have you been involved in, Fred?
Over the years, quite a few. We joined ANR and TNS very shortly after we became nudists. I belonged to South Florida Free Beaches for many years, although I'd never gotten to Hollover Beach until a few months ago. We have initially had a camper at Steph's Pond outside Rochester. While I was in Syracuse, we also later shifted to Empire Haven, and of course now I belong to Cypress Cove.
Can you tell us briefly about your nudist history and some interesting activities you may have had in the past?
Well, I've had a number of them. Over the years I've been pretty active in it. Probably from the library point of view, the scanning project that we're involved in was one of the things that was most challenging and most interesting, and I think most beneficial.
Mm-hmm.
We can discuss the beginning of that a little bit if you'd like to later on. Or?
Yeah, why don't we do that? How long have you been involved with the library?
I got involved in the early 2000s. A good friend of ours, Jane Fields, who used to run Timberlake's nudist resort up in Pennsylvania, was a library volunteer and a good friend of ours, and she tried, I think, for a number of years to convince me to volunteer. And in those days, the library was just getting into computers. They had 2 computers. Somebody had set them up with a membership database and a magazine database, and I don't know what happened, but he was out of the picture. And in those days, Windows was not nearly as stable as it was today, and computers had a good deal of, quite a few problems. Mm-hmm. And she convinced me to come in, even though I knew nothing about libraries. Maybe I could get the computers under control. And the first thing I did was get the computers networked so they could share files back and forth, and set them up with duplicate programs on each computer. So if they had a problem on one, they couldn't print from it, they could go to the other and work from there. It didn't hold up their newsletter production or things like that. We also started a little backup program where we had the files on one computer and backed them up on the other in case of hard drive failures. So that was kind of the beginning of my activities in the library.
About when was that?
That would have been early in the 2000s, probably 2001 or 2.
Talk a little bit about the way it was then compared to the way it is now.
Well, the way it was then was a handful of dedicated volunteers who each did their own thing, and things were very, I would say, administrative. We were updating membership, we were updating donations as they came in, but there was really no strategic planning, no thoughts for the future. We were just doing what we've been doing and moving ahead and keeping things going.
Preserving, basically.
Preserving, yes.
What positions have you held at the library?
I started out as co-chair of the scanning group, and I was secretary for a couple of years back in the mid-2000s.
Let's talk a little bit about your major accomplishments, which I know what that's going to be.
Well, certainly the scanning project has been my major involvement. After the hurricanes in 2004, when 3 hurricanes hit the library within a period of several months, we began to realize that our collection was really in serious jeopardy, that a fire or a flood or hurricane damage could wipe out the collection. And one of the things we realized was that although the books probably existed somewhere else, there probably are rare bookstores, people tend to save copies of books. The magazines people throw out after they've read them. So the history in the magazines was really at risk. And we looked into a number of possibilities. One was putting in a fire protection system here in the library. That would have to be a halon system like they use in computer rooms. And that, as we got into it, was very expensive. The room ideally is designed to have very low air leakage so the halon stays in place. Our building wasn't, so it would take a lot of retrofit to make that work. And the halon system itself was pretty expensive to install. And of course it would not protect against hurricanes or flooding. In those days, scanning bound volumes was very difficult. Somebody, I don't recall whether it was me or someone else, did some research, and we found there was one scanner made in Sweden that did automatically scan books. But it was described as being about the size of a Volkswagen Beetle, weighing about as much, and I assume costing a good deal more, which was pretty much out of the question for us. About that time, an outfit outside Rochester, I think it was in Pittsford, New York, known as Curtas, developed an automatic page-turning scanner that was more within the realm. It was brand new. It was a big machine. It cost about $150,000. At that point in time, it was used by the Library of Congress, Google, maybe the Government Services Administration, but they contracted the manufacturer and had 3 or 4 built at a time and then spent their time trying to sell them. So we had some real great dreams about how we might use this. One of the ideas was that we have the attendants out in the gatehouse. They're not doing anything much of the time. We could get them to basically put a book in the scanner, turn it on, and let it run for an hour or so, scanning the book. Next time they had a break, take it out and put a new one in. And Ted was very much enthused on this. He thought Ted Hadley, the manager at the time, was very much enthused on this. And it sounded like a very easy way to go. Well, I spend my summers in Syracuse, which is about 60 or 70 miles from the place this was manufactured. So I made a quick trip over there to look at it, try it out, and see what we could do on arrangements to procure it. Well, it turns out it wasn't quite as automatic as it was advertised to be. In the ideal situation, if your pages are very limp and laid very flat by themselves, it would do it itself. But if they're a little bit stiff, somebody had to kind of lay them flat. So it took a full-time operator, which obviously made it impractical to do in the gatehouse. So our next idea was possibly to rent it for a few months and get a good number of volunteers here working on a detailed schedule and see if we couldn't scan things very quickly. But when we thought about the number of people involved and the number of shifts and the scheduling and the training and the quality control, that sort of thing, we pretty much decided that was not a feasible sort of thing. It would have cost about $50,000 to rent it for 3 months, so we would have to really have things down pat and running smoothly. And getting retired volunteers to commit to that type of thing and avoid doctor's appointments and kids' birthdays and so forth, we thought was just more than we could handle. So at that point we've been raising money. I think we raised around $50,000 or $55,000. And we decided we'd start scanning the Who's Who files, loose paper that we could do on a sheet-fed scanner. So we bought the Fujitsu scanner that's I think over there right now, and scanned a lot of the Who's Who files and some of the club files. And then it turned out that I guess I did more research and found an outfit known as ATIS had done a ripped-off version of the Curtas scanner. It was one that also used 2 good cameras and was very gentle on the books. And we investigated that, and it looked pretty good, but we did some reference checks, and one of the people we checked with was not at all happy with it. Reading between the lines, we felt that individual was not particularly mechanically inclined or technically inclined and was having trouble with the setup and adjustments, but they were not fundamental problems. They were more an operator training issue. But by that time, things were getting very political in the library, and I was not one of the most popular people with my ideas. And I was hesitant to propose it because I thought it would be quite an argumentative situation. So, shortly thereafter, I decided I was not really being effective in the project. There was too much difference of opinion, and I was not being effective. It was time for somebody else to take over and get a fresh start. So I resigned that, and Chris Mitchie came on board. Suggested to the board that they buy the scanner, and they said yes without debate. And that's the scanner we have in the alcove right now. That's working very well. So that was my involvement in the scanning project.
Quite a bit of involvement there.
I might add to that, Dave, that at that point in time, our goal was very much preservation of materials. That was the thing we felt was most important, that if there was a storm and we lost some stuff, it was gone forever. We were aware that we wanted to make it more accessible and get it usable by more people, but that was not our initial goal in setting it up. That was
just strictly preservation at the
right. That was a thing in the future.
Well, that sort of leads into my next question. How has the library progressed from the way you envisioned it would?
Well, of course, the scanning project has gone a lot more slowly than we dreamed about it.
But it's working very well.
It's working very well, yes. It's we've got a lot of new people in. They're doing a very good job on things. We've got a lot more volunteers who are doing the scanning and processing the data and making it accessible. So, yeah, it's moving along very well.
What would you think is the biggest challenge for the library in the near future?
Well, I think it's making the information we have accessible in various formats in a way that nudists are comfortable having it shared. One of the mistakes we made in the beginning was saying that we'd be putting this stuff on the internet, and boy, did we get a flashback on that. My grandmother was in that 30 years ago, and I wouldn't want anybody to see her nude. So we had to pull in our horns very quickly and say that we would have controlled access, probably at nudist clubs that could have a computer terminal and would agree to limit it so people could not email copies of things or print them or make copies, that they could view them only and would have to contact the library and ask for copies if they wanted detailed information.
Well, that's the library here is set up their patron computer, as you know, and a lot of people are using it, not as many as I hope in the future. That we're still investigating how to handle the legal aspect of letting it get outside these 4 walls.
Yeah, that's a sticky one.
Yes. Do you have any other items or closing remarks you'd like to make this morning?
Well, just that I think my greatest accomplishment in this organization was convincing an individual who was not associated with the library to serve as its president a couple of years back. I think we've seen more change in the year or two that he's been president than in the previous 20. So I think that's probably my crowning achievement. And if you haven't guessed, that individual is sitting next to me today.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you for your time this morning, and have a good day.
Okay, thank you, David. I'm honored to be here. Okay.
Okay.
Stand by. Okay.
Was that too painful?
Nope.
That was good.